You are reactive. Someone says something, and you respond instantly. Someone does something, and you feel it immediately. Every provocation gets your attention and reaction. Every criticism hits its target. Every offense penetrates. And this reactivity is destroying you. It is destroying your relationships. It is destroying your career. It is destroying your peace. Because when others can control your emotional state, they have control over you. But there is another way. A skill so rare and so powerful that those who possess it seem almost untouchable. Emotional detachment. It is not coldness. It's not repression. It's the ability to observe without reacting, to witness without being controlled, to be involved without being destabilized. This audiobook will teach you this skill, the psychological advantage that changes everything, the ability to remain unmoved when everyone around you is being affected. Stop being reactive. Start being untouchable. Chapter 1. Your reactivity is your weakness. You are reactive. Completely, utterly, predictably reactive. Someone says something and you respond immediately. Someone does something and you feel it instantly. A comment lands and your mood shifts. A criticism arrives and your confidence shakes. A provocation appears and you take the bait. Every single time, you operate in constant reaction mode, and this reactivity is not a personality trait. It is not emotional intelligence. It is not being authentic or genuine. Your reactivity is your fundamental weakness. It is the crack in your armor that everyone can see. It is the vulnerability that makes you controllable by anyone who discovers how to exploit it. Here is what you need to understand. When you react automatically to external stimuli, you hand over control of your internal state. You give everyone around you a remote control to your emotions. They press a button and you feel something. They say a word and your mood changes. They behave a certain way and your peace disappears. This is not connection. This is not sensitivity. This is slavery. You're a slave to every stimulus that arrives. A slave to every person who discovers which buttons to press. A slave to circumstances you never chose and cannot control. That is the key. Every reaction is a surrender of control. Not sometimes. Every time. When you react automatically, you are surrendering. You're saying that this external stimulus has more power over your internal state than you do. You're admitting that others can determine how you feel simply by choosing their words or actions carefully. You're confessing that you have no sovereignty over your own emotional experience. That anyone who wants to can reach inside you and rearrange your internal furniture. That is what reactivity means. That is what it costs you. And you have been paying that cost your entire life without recognizing the transaction. Think about what happens when someone criticizes you. The words arrive, and before you have even processed them fully, you feel something. Defensiveness, anger, hurt, shame. The feeling arises automatically. You did not choose it. You did not evaluate whether the criticism was valid. You did not decide how you wanted to feel. The reaction simply happened. The stimulus triggered the response. And you experienced whatever emotion your programming dictated. No choice, no agency, just automatic reactivity that someone else initiated. You have a choice. You can continue operating this way, reactive to everything, controlled by everyone. Or you can recognize reactivity for the weakness it is and begin developing something different. Something that looks like strength. Something that feels like freedom. Something that makes you untouchable by the stimuli that currently destabilize you daily. Here is how others exploit your reactivity. They discover your triggers. They learn what upsets you. They notice what makes you defensive, what makes you angry, what makes you insecure. And once they know these things, they have power. Not official power, not legitimate power, manipulation power, The power to control your state by deploying the right stimulus at the right time. Consider the colleague who knows how to upset you. They have discovered, perhaps through observation, perhaps through trial and error, exactly what to say to throw you off balance. Maybe it is a certain type of criticism. Maybe it is a particular tone. Maybe it is bringing up a subject you are sensitive about. They know. And when they need to destabilize you, when they want you reactive rather than composed, they deploy that knowledge. They press the button, and you react. Predictably, automatically, like a machine responding to input. Consider the family member who knows exactly what to say. They have years of data, decades of observation. They know your insecurities better than anyone. They know what words will cut deepest. They know which topics will trigger you most reliably. And whether consciously or unconsciously, they use this knowledge. In arguments, in disagreements, in moments when they want to gain advantage or simply want to hurt you. Your predictable reactivity is their weapon. Your consistent triggers are their ammunition. Consider the stranger who can derail your entire day. Someone in traffic, someone online, someone who says something that hits exactly the wrong nerve. They do not even know you. They have no idea what they triggered. But your day is affected. Your mood is altered. Your peace is disturbed. A stranger with no investment in your life reached through the wall of your existence and changed your internal state. Because you are reactive. Because you have no defense against stimuli that know how to find your triggers. That is the key. Your predictable reactions become weapons others can use against you. Not because people are necessarily malicious, but because reactions that can be predicted can be exploited. If I know that a certain comment will make you defensive, I can use that comment strategically. If I know that a certain topic will derail you emotionally, I can introduce that topic when it serves my purposes. Your reactivity is not private. Your triggers are not secret. People observe. People learn. And what they learn, they use. It is not about becoming paranoid. It is not about assuming everyone is trying to manipulate you. It is about recognizing a mechanical truth. Predictable reactivity creates vulnerability, and vulnerability invites exploitation. Even well-meaning people will unconsciously use knowledge of your triggers when conflict arises. Even people who love you will press buttons they have discovered when emotions run high. This is not malice. This is human nature interacting with your weakness. Remove the weakness and the exploitation cannot occur. Here is the cost of automatic emotional response. The cost is concrete, measurable, visible in your history if you have the courage to look. The argument you regret because you reacted instead of responded. You know the one. Words were said that you wish you could take back. Positions were taken that you did not actually hold. Damage was done that took months to repair. All because you reacted. All because stimulus arrived and response followed automatically. No gap. No evaluation. No choice. Just reaction that cost you something you valued. The opportunity lost because emotion clouded judgment. The decision you made from anger that you would have made differently from calm. The chance you missed because fear arose and you could not see past it. The path not taken because insecurity whispered that you were not ready, not good enough, not capable. Emotion clouded your perception. Reactivity stole your clarity. An opportunity disappeared into the gap between what you saw and what was actually there. The relationship damaged because you could not remain calm. The person who mattered, who still matters, who was hurt by your reaction rather than embraced by your response. The connection that weakened because you could not detach from the stimulus long enough to choose your behavior. The trust that eroded because your reactivity made you unpredictable, volatile, unsafe. Every relationship you value has been affected by your reactivity. Some have been destroyed by it. You have a choice. Continue paying these costs. Continue reacting automatically. Continue being controlled by every stimulus, exploited by every trigger, damaged by every automatic response. Or begin the transformation. Begin developing the skill that makes these costs unnecessary. Begin becoming someone who observes without reacting, who feels without being controlled, who respond from choice rather than programming. The costs are already high. The costs continue accumulating with every automatic reaction. But the accumulation is not inevitable. The pattern can be broken. The reactivity can be replaced with something better. Something that protects you. Something that empowers you. Something that makes you untouchable by the stimuli that currently control your life. Every reaction is a surrender of control. You have been surrendering constantly, daily, in situations large and small, to people who matter and people who do not. The surrender has been so automatic you did not recognize it as surrender. But it is, every time, and it has been costing you control over your own emotional life, your own decisions, your own relationships, your own peace. The surrender can stop. The reactivity can end. The weakness can be transformed into strength. But first, you must understand what you are developing. What emotional detachment actually means. What it is and what is not. Because you have misconceptions. Misconceptions that will prevent you from developing the skill if they are not corrected. You understand now that your reactivity is your weakness. You see the vulnerability it creates. You recognize the costs it has imposed. Now let us clarify what the alternative actually looks like. Because detachment is not what you think it is. Chapter 2. Detachment is not what you think it is. You have a picture in your mind of what emotional detachment looks like. And that picture is wrong. You imagine someone cold, someone distant, someone who does not feel, does not connect, does not care. You imagine a wall between them and the world, a barrier that keeps everything out. You imagine someone who has traded their humanity for invulnerability. And because this is what you imagine, you resist. You do not want to become that person. You do not want to sacrifice warmth for protection. You do not want to choose between feeling and freedom. But here is what you need to understand. That picture is a lie. A misconception that has prevented you from developing the most valuable psychological skill available. Here is what emotional detachment is not. It is not coldness. It is not apathy. It is not suppression. It is not disconnection from humanity. It is not a wall between you and the world. It is not numbing yourself to avoid pain. It is not pretending emotions do not exist. It is not becoming a robot who moves through life without feeling. Every one of these misconceptions is wrong. Every one of these false beliefs has prevented you from pursuing a skill that would transform your life. That is the key. Detachment is not feeling less. It is being controlled less. The distinction is everything. You can feel fully while not being controlled by what you feel. You can experience emotion completely while still choosing your response. You can engage deeply while maintaining stability. These are not contradictions. These are the actual mechanics of emotional detachment. And until you understand this, you will continue confusing detachment with coldness and rejecting a skill you desperately need. Think about what you actually want. You want to feel without being hijacked. You want to experience emotion without being destabilized by it. You want to engage with life fully while maintaining the capacity to choose your responses. You want depth without drowning, connection without losing yourself, experience without being controlled by every experience that arrives. This is not coldness. This is not apathy. This is freedom. And this is what emotional detachment actually provides. You have a choice. Continue believing the misconception and remain reactive forever. Or correct your understanding and begin developing a skill that delivers exactly what you want. The misconception has protected your self-image. It has allowed you to tell yourself that your reactivity is actually sensitivity, actually emotional intelligence, actually being authentic. But it is none of those things. Your reactivity is weakness, and the detachment you have been avoiding is strength. Here is what detachment actually provides. First, it provides the ability to feel fully while choosing your response. This seems paradoxical only because you have collapsed feeling and reacting into the same thing. You have assumed that if you feel something, you must react to it, that the intensity of emotion must dictate the intensity of response. But this assumption is false. Feeling and responding are separate operations. They can be connected, but they do not have to be. Detachment separates them. It allows you to feel everything while still choosing how to respond to what you feel. Consider what this looks like in practice. Someone criticizes you. You feel the criticism. You notice hurt arising, or defensiveness, or anger. The feeling is real. The feeling is fully experienced. You're not suppressing it. You're not pretending it does not exist. You feel it completely, and then you choose your response. Not from the feeling, from clarity, from strategy, from wisdom about what response will actually serve you. The feeling informed you. The feeling did not control you. That is detachment. Second, detachment provides the capacity to observe emotions without being hijacked by them. There's a part of you that can watch your emotional experience, a witness that notices what is happening without being consumed by it. This observer self has always existed, but you have never learned to access it consistently. You have been so identified with your emotions that the observer has been buried. Detachment unearths the observer. It makes the witnessing position accessible. And from that position, emotions become information rather than commands. Third, detachment provides the power to engage deeply while maintaining stability. This is perhaps the most important clarification. You have assumed that detachment means disengagement, that protecting yourself from emotional control requires withdrawing from emotional experience. But this is exactly wrong. Detachment allows deeper engagement because the fear of being destabilized no longer prevents full participation. You can enter difficult conversations fully because you know you will not lose yourself. You can engage with challenging situations completely because your stability does not depend on the situation going well. Detachment enables engagement. It does not prevent it. That is the key. The detached person is not removed from life. The detached person is more fully present because presence is no longer threatening. They can show up completely because showing up does not risk losing themselves. They can engage deeply because depth does not mean drowning. The stability they have developed makes presence safe in a way it is not safe for reactive people. It is not about protecting yourself by withdrawing. It is about developing the capacity that makes withdrawal unnecessary. It is not about building walls. It is about becoming so stable that walls are not needed. It is not about feeling less. It is about being controlled less by what you feel. The distinction seems subtle, but changes everything. Here is the detached person in action. Consider the leader who receives criticism without defensiveness. The criticism arrives. It may be valid or invalid. It may be delivered kindly or harshly. But the leader does not react defensively. They do not counterattack. They do not shut down. They do not become emotional in ways that cloud their judgment. They receive the criticism. They evaluate it. They respond in whatever way serves the situation best. This is not coldness. This is not indifference to feedback. This is detachment, the ability to receive input without being destabilized by it. Consider the negotiator who remains calm when others escalate. The other party raises their voice, makes threats, attempts to destabilize through aggression. The negotiator notices all of this. feels whatever feelings arise in response, and remains calm, not because they are suppressing, because they are not controlled by the escalation. Their state is theirs. The other party's tactics cannot reach in and rearrange their internal experience. This calm is not performance. It is detachment. It is having developed the capacity to not be controlled by external circumstances. Consider the partner who does not take bait during conflict. The argument heats up. Their partner says something designed to wound, something that knows exactly where to cut. And they do not take the bait. They do not escalate. They do not return wound for wound. They feel what was said. They notice the hurt or anger arising, and they respond from choice rather than reaction. They do not surrender control of the conversation to their partner's provocation. This is not disconnection from the relationship. This is protection of the relationship through detachment from automatic reaction. You have a choice. Become like these examples or remain reactive. Develop the skill they have or continue being controlled by every stimulus. The examples are not superhuman. They are not uniquely gifted. They simply developed something you have not developed. And what they developed, you can develop. The skill is learnable. The capacity is buildable. The detachment is achievable. But only if you release the misconception that has been preventing you from pursuing it. Here is what you must accept. You can feel everything and still choose your response. You can experience emotion fully and still maintain stability. You can engage deeply and still remain yourself. These are not contradictions. These are the actual characteristics of emotional detachment. The picture in your mind was wrong. The coldness you imagined was a caricature. The real thing is something different, something better, something that gives you everything you want without taking away anything you value. The reactive person feels and is controlled by feeling. The detached person feels and chooses what to do with feeling. The reactive person experiences emotion and is hijacked by experience. The detached person experiences emotion and remains the captain of their own ship. The reactive person engages and loses themselves. The detached person engages and remains whole. These differences are not about feeling less. They're about being controlled less. And being controlled less while feeling fully is the skill you are here to develop. You understand now what detachment actually is. You have released the misconception that was preventing progress. You see that detachment is freedom, not coldness. Choice, not apathy. Stability, not suppression. But understanding is not enough. You need to know how detachment actually works. How the space between stimulus and response is created. How you develop the capacity to choose rather than react. Chapter 3. The space between stimulus and response. Something happens and you react. The sequence seems instantaneous, seamless, automatic. Stimulus arrives, response follows. There appears to be no gap, no pause, no moment where choice could intervene. The reaction feels like a single event rather than a chain of events. And this appearance of instantaneousness is the illusion that keeps you enslaved. Because there is a gap. There is a space between what happens to you and how you respond. A space where everything changes. A space where your power lives. But you have collapsed this space to nothing. You have eliminated the gap through years of automatic reacting. And until you rebuild it, until you expand that space, you will remain reactive, controlled, predictable, weak. Here is what you need to understand. Between every stimulus and every response, there is a moment, a fraction of time where the stimulus has arrived, but the response has not yet occurred. In that moment, choice is possible. Evaluation is possible. Selection of response is possible. But for most people, this moment has been compressed to nothing. The stimulus triggers the response so quickly that no choice occurs. The reaction is automatic, programmed. inevitable, like a machine responding to input according to fixed rules. That is the key. In the gap lives your power. All of it. Every bit of psychological freedom you could ever possess exists in that space between stimulus and response. When the gap is collapsed, you are a machine. Input determines output. Stimulus determines response. You have no more agency than a calculator that must display for when someone enters 2 plus 2. But when the gap is expanded, you become free. Input arrives, but you choose the output. Stimulus appears, but you select the response. The same circumstances that controlled you completely now have no power over you at all. Think about what happens currently. Someone says something critical. The words arrive at your ears, and before you have consciously processed them, your body is responding. Heart rate increases. Muscles tense. Emotions arise. Words form in your mouth. The reaction has occurred before you even recognized you were reacting. There was no gap. There was no space for choice. The stimulus ran directly into the response like a train on tracks with no station in between. Now imagine something different. Someone says something critical. The words arrive, and there is a pause, a space, a moment where you notice the words have arrived, but you have not yet responded. In that space, you observe. You notice what feelings are arising. You evaluate whether the criticism has merit. You consider what response would actually serve you. And then you choose, deliberately, consciously, from clarity rather than reactivity. This is what the gap provides. This is what you have been missing. This is where your power has been waiting. You have a choice. Continue with no gap, reacting automatically to everything, controlled by every stimulus that arrives. Or begin building the space between stimulus and response, developing the capacity for choice that transforms everything. One path is passive. It requires nothing because nothing changes. The other path is active. It requires training. It requires practice. It requires the deliberate cultivation of something that does not develop naturally. Here is how the gap is created. It is created through awareness, through the development of a part of you that can notice what is happening rather than just being swept along by it. This noticing is the beginning of the gap. When you can notice a stimulus arriving, notice a reaction forming, notice the process that usually happens automatically, you have created space. You have inserted awareness between the stimulus and the response. And awareness is the foundation of choice. Consider what awareness actually means in this context. It means catching yourself in the act of reacting. It means noticing the feeling before it becomes the action. It means seeing the trigger as a trigger rather than simply being triggered. This awareness is not natural. Most people move through life in a kind of trance, reacting to everything without ever noticing that they are reacting. Breaking that trance requires deliberate practice, requires training your attention to notice what has always been happening outside of conscious awareness. The practice begins with retrospective awareness. After a reaction has occurred, you review it. You notice that you reacted. You examine what the trigger was. You observe what the response was. You see the connection between them. This retrospective awareness seems useless because the reaction already happened. But it is training. It is teaching your mind to recognize the pattern. And recognition is the first step toward interruption. Then awareness becomes concurrent. As you practice retrospective awareness, you begin catching yourself earlier. You notice reactions as they are happening rather than after they have completed. You feel the emotion arising while it arises. You see the response forming while it forms. The gap begins to appear, not large at first, but present, a small space where before there was none. Finally, awareness becomes anticipatory. You see the trigger approaching. You recognize the pattern before it fully activates. You notice the early signs of a reaction forming before the reaction takes over. And in that recognition, in that anticipation, the gap expands fully. You have space. You have time. You have the opportunity to choose. That is the key. Awareness creates the gap, and the gap allows choice. Without awareness, there is no gap. Without the gap, there is no choice. The entire chain depends on developing the capacity to notice what is happening, to observe the process that has been automatic, to see the stimulus and the response as separate events rather than a single inevitability. It is not about thinking slowly. It is not about intellectualizing every moment. It is about awareness that operates quickly but still creates space. The gap does not have to be long to be powerful. A fraction of a second of awareness can be enough to interrupt a reaction, to create the opportunity for a different response, to transform what would have been automatic into what becomes chosen. Here is the protocol for building the gap. First, practice noticing after the fact. When you catch yourself having reacted, stop. Review what happened. Identify the trigger. Identify the response. See the pattern clearly. Do this every time you notice a reaction has occurred. The noticing itself is the practice. The reviewing is the training. You're teaching your mind to recognize what it has been doing unconsciously. Second, install reminders that prompt awareness. Physical reminders that interrupt the trance of automatic living. A note on your mirror, an alarm on your phone, a bracelet you touch consciously. These reminders bring you back to awareness throughout the day. They break the spell of reactivity. They create moments where you remember that you're trying to notice rather than just react. Third, practice in low-stakes situations. Do not try to build the gap first in high-stakes moments when your strongest triggers are activated. Build the gap in small moments. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Notice. A minor criticism arrives. Notice. A small irritation occurs. Notice. The gap is easier to build when the stimulus is weak, and the gap built in small moments becomes available in large moments. Fourth, use physical anchors. The gap is easier to create when the body supports it. A deliberate breath creates space. A pause before speaking creates space. A physical sensation you focus on creates space. These anchors give you something to do in the moment between stimulus and response, something that expands the gap rather than allowing it to collapse. You have a choice. Implement these practices and build the gap, or continue without them and remain gapless. The practices are not complex. They do not require equipment or special circumstances. They require only attention, only intention, only the decision to become aware of what has been automatic. The gap is waiting to be built. Your power is waiting to be claimed. The only question is whether you will do the work. Consider what the expanded gap makes possible. Every skill in this audiobook depends on the gap. Detachment requires the gap. Non-reaction requires the gap. Choosing response requires the gap. Without the space between stimulus and response, none of these are possible. You cannot detach from what you're not aware of. You cannot choose non-reaction when reaction happens automatically. The gap is the foundation. The gap is the prerequisite. Everything else is built on the space you create between what happens to you and how you respond. Here is what most people never discover. They assume reactivity is inevitable. They assume stimulus must produce response automatically. They assume there is no gap because they have never experienced a gap. But the gap is not absent. The gap has been collapsed, compressed, eliminated through years of unconscious reacting. And what has been collapsed can be expanded. What has been eliminated can be rebuilt. The gap is not something you create from nothing. It is something you restore, something you reclaim, something that has always been potentially present but has been dormant. The restoration requires practice. The reclamation requires training. The gap does not expand through understanding alone. You must do the work. You must notice after reactions. You must install reminders. You must practice in low-stake situations. You must use physical anchors. The work is simple, but not easy. Simple because the practices are clear. Not easy because they require consistent effort against habitual patterns. You understand now that the gap exists. You understand that awareness creates the gap. You understand the practices that build it. But the gap is a container. It creates space, but does not determine what happens in that space. One of the most important things that can happen in the gap is depersonalization. Recognizing that most of what happens has nothing to do with you. Chapter 4. Stop taking things personally. You take everything personally. Every criticism feels like an attack on your worth. Every slight feels like a judgment of your value. Every negative interaction feels like it is about you, directed at you, caused by you. This personalization is exhausting. It makes you vulnerable to everything because everything becomes about you. It transforms every moment into a potential assault on your identity. It keeps you defensive, reactive, unstable. And here is what you need to understand. Most of what happens has nothing to do with you. Almost nothing that occurs is actually about you. The personalization that dominates your experience is a distortion, a lens that warps reality, a habit that creates suffering where none needs to exist. Here is what you need to understand. When you personalize everything, you put yourself at the center of every interaction. You assume you are the cause, the target, the point, but you are not the center of other people's lives. You are not the primary concern in most situations. You are not the focus of most behaviors directed your way. Other people are living their own lives, fighting their own battles, responding to their own histories. And most of what they do, even when it affects you, is not about you at all. That is the key. Most of what happens has nothing to do with you. The criticism that felt like an attack was someone expressing their own frustration, their own standards, their own pain. The slight that felt like rejection was someone caught in their own world, their own concerns, their own limitations. The behavior that felt targeted was someone acting out patterns that existed long before they met you. You were present. You were affected, but you were not the cause. You were not the point. Think about your own behavior. When you are short with someone, is it always about them? When you criticize, is the criticism purely about the person receiving it? When you behave in ways that affect others negatively, is that behavior always caused by them? Of course not. Often you are tired. Often you are stressed. Often you are responding to things that have nothing to do with the person in front of you. They receive your behavior, but they did not cause it. They experience the effect, but they are not the reason. Now apply this understanding to others. When they are short with you, it may not be about you. When they criticize, the criticism reveals their state as much as it reveals anything about you. When their behavior affects you negatively, you may be receiving something that was never actually directed at you. You were present. You were affected, but you were not the cause. You have a choice. Continue taking everything personally and remain vulnerable to everything. Or recognize that most of what happens is not about you and free yourself from the exhausting burden of constant personalization. One path keeps you at the center of every interaction. Defending an identity you imagine is under constant attack. The other path moves you from the center, allowing you to engage with reality rather than the distorted version personalization creates. Here is what is actually happening when someone's behavior affects you. They are operating from their own pain, their own patterns, their own histories. The criticism they deliver says as much about their standards, their frustrations, their way of seeing the world as it says about you. Perhaps more. You are receiving an expression of their inner state. You are experiencing the output of their internal processes, and those processes were running long before you enter the picture. Consider the critical boss. Their criticism feels personal, feels like judgment of your competence, feels like attack on your value. But examine more closely. This boss criticizes everyone. This boss has patterns that existed before you joined the company. This boss is expressing their own standards, their own anxieties, their own need for control. You are receiving the expression. You're not its cause. The criticism would exist regardless of who occupied your position. You happen to be there. That does not make it about you. Consider the dismissive friend. Their dismissiveness feels like rejection, feels like judgment that you are not important enough, feels personal. But examine more closely. This friend is preoccupied. This friend has their own concerns consuming their attention. This friend has limited capacity right now for reasons that have nothing to do with you. You are receiving the effect of their state. You're not its cause. The dismissiveness would exist regardless of who was trying to connect with them. You happen to be there. That does not make it about you. Consider the angry stranger. Their anger feels directed at you. Feels like you did something to deserve this response. Feels personal. But examine more closely. This stranger was angry before they encountered you. This stranger has patterns of anger that exist independently of any interaction with you. This stranger is expressing something that was already present. You are receiving the output. You are not its cause. The anger would have found expression regardless of who was in the way. You happen to be there. That does not make it about you. That is the key. When you stop taking things personally, you stop being affected by things that were never about you. And most things were never about you. The personalization was a distortion. The interpretation that everything was directed at your worth was inaccurate. When you correct the distortion, when you see clearly that others are operating from their own processes, the effect on you diminishes. You're no longer defending an identity that was never actually under attack. You're no longer reactive to provocations that were never actually provocations. It is not about dismissing all feedback. It is not about ignoring everything because nothing is about you. Some things are about you. Some feedback is valid. Some criticism is accurate. The skill is discernment. The capacity to evaluate what is actually about you and what is about the other person. Without discernment, you either take everything personally or take nothing personally. Both are errors. Discernment allows accurate assessment. Accurate assessment allows appropriate response. Here is the depersonalization practice. When something affects you, when you feel the personalization arising, pause. This is where the gap you built in the previous chapter becomes essential. In that pause, ask a question. Is this actually about me? Not does this affect me? Of course it affects you. But is it about you? Is the cause you? Is the target you? Is the meaning about your worth? Often the answer is no. The cause is something in the other person. The target is not really you, but whoever happens to be present. The meaning is about their state, not your worth. When you see this clearly, the personalization releases. The effect diminishes. You can engage with what is happening without feeling your identity is at stake. When the answer is yes, when something actually is about you, you can receive it without defensiveness. Because you have already done the evaluation. Because you're not automatically assuming everything is about you. When you stop personalizing everything, you can actually hear the feedback that is about you. You can evaluate it clearly. You can use it constructively. The depersonalization practice does not make you deaf to valid feedback. It makes you able to hear valid feedback without drowning in invalid personalization. You have a choice. Continue taking everything personally and remain overwhelmed by stimuli that were never actually about you. Or develop the practice of depersonalization and engage with reality as it actually is. The practice requires the gap. It requires the pause where you can ask the question. It requires the awareness to evaluate rather than react. But when practiced consistently, it transforms your experience. It reduces the attacks you perceive because most attacks were never attacks. It frees attention and energy that was consumed by defending an identity that was not actually under threat. Consider what depersonalization makes possible. Relationships improve because you stop responding to attacks that were not attacks. Conflicts diminish because you stop defending against offenses that were not offenses. Peace increases because you stop feeling constantly under siege by a world that was never actually besieging you. The change is not in circumstances. The change is in perception. And change perception changes everything. Here is what most people never learn. They spend their lives at the center of a universe that does not actually revolve around them. They interpret everything as about them. They defend constantly against attacks that were never launched. They exhaust themselves protecting an identity that was never threatened. And this exhaustion is unnecessary. The defense is unnecessary. The personalization that requires both is a habit that can be broken. The habit breaks through practice, through using the gap to ask whether something is actually about you, through recognizing how often the answer is no, through experiencing the relief that comes when you stop taking personally what was never personal. Each time you depersonalize accurately, the habit weakens. Each time you see clearly that something was not about you, the pattern of personalization loses power. Eventually, depersonalization becomes default. Eventually, you stop assuming everything is about you and start evaluating accurately. The world is not thinking about you as much as you imagine. People are not focused on you as much as you believe. Events are not directed at you as much as you assume. This is not dismissal of your importance. This is accurate perception of reality. An accurate perception is the foundation of emotional detachment. When you stop taking things personally, you stop being controlled by things that were never about controlling you. You become free in ways that personalization made impossible. You understand now the distortion of personalization. You understand that most of what happens has nothing to do with you. You understand the practice of evaluating rather than assuming. But there is deeper work ahead. Not just depersonalizing events, but learning to observe your own emotions without being consumed by them. Learning to have emotions without becoming emotions. Chapter 5. Observe the emotion without becoming the emotion. When anger arises, you become angry. When fear appears, you become fearful. When sadness arrives, you become sad. The emotion does not visit you. The emotion possesses you. It takes over your entire being. It becomes who you are in that moment. You do not experience the emotion. You are the emotion. And this complete identification with every emotional state that arises is why you cannot detach. Why you cannot choose your response. Why you are controlled by whatever feeling happens to appear. You have never learned the fundamental distinction that makes emotional freedom possible. You have emotions. You are not your emotions. Here is what you need to understand. There's a difference between having an experience and being consumed by that experience. When anger arises, you could notice it, observe it, feel it fully while remaining aware that you are the one feeling, not the feeling itself. But this is not what happens. When anger arises, you merge with it. You become it. There is no separation between you and the emotion. There is no observer watching the experience. There is only the experience itself, and you have disappeared into it completely. That is the key. You have emotions. You are not your emotions. This distinction seems simple, but changes everything. When you have an emotion, you can observe it. You can evaluate it. You can decide how to respond to it. The emotion is an experience occurring within you, but you remain the one having the experience. When you are in emotion, none of this is possible. The emotion has taken over. You have merged with it. There is no separate self remaining to observe or evaluate or choose. The emotion is running the show, and you have surrendered the stage entirely. Think about what happens when strong emotion arises. Fear appears, and suddenly everything is fear. Your thoughts become fearful thoughts. Your perceptions become filtered through fear. Your body becomes a vessel of fear. Your identity in that moment is fear. There's no part of you standing apart, watching, remaining stable while the fear passes through. You have become the fear. And as the fear, you cannot do anything except what fear does. React, contract, flee. The choices that would be available to a self-observing fear are not available to a self that has become fear. You have a choice. Continue merging with every emotion that arises and remain controlled by the weather of your inner life. Or learn to observe emotions without becoming them and discover what it means to have feelings without being had by them. One path keeps you at the mercy of whatever emotional state appears. The other path gives you back yourself regardless of what you feel. Here is what the observer self actually is. There is a part of you that can watch your experience. A witness that notices what is happening without being swept into what is happening. This observer has always existed. It is there right now, behind your thoughts, behind your feelings, aware of the reading that is occurring, aware of the mental voice processing these words. The observer is not a concept you need to create. The observer is a capacity you need to access consistently. Consider moments when you have experienced the observer. Perhaps during meditation, when you notice thoughts arising and watch them pass without following them. Perhaps during a moment of crisis, when time seemed to slow and you observed yourself from a slight distance. Perhaps during an emotional peak, when a part of you seemed to stand apart and notice how emotional you were being. These moments reveal that the observer exists. They prove the capacity is there. What you lack is not the observer. What you lack is consistent access to the observer. The observer is not cold. The observer is not disconnected. The observer is simply aware. Aware of what is arising. Aware of what is being experienced. Aware without being consumed. When you access the observer during an emotional experience, you do not stop feeling. You feel fully, but you feel while remaining aware that you are feeling. You experience the emotion while maintaining the perspective that you are not the emotion. This dual awareness is the foundation of emotional detachment. That is the key. The observer allows full feeling without full identification. You can feel anger completely. Every sensation, every impulse, every thought pattern that anger brings. And simultaneously, you can be aware that anger is arising, that you're feeling angry, that this is an experience you're having rather than who you are. This dual awareness changes everything. It creates space. It enables choice. It transforms emotions from controllers into information. It is not about suppressing emotion to access the observer. Suppression is not observation. Suppression is pushing emotion away. Observation is allowing emotion fully while remaining aware. The distinction is crucial. Suppression creates problems. It builds pressure. It leaks out in unexpected ways. It damages health and relationships. But observation creates no problems. Observation allows complete experience. The emotion arises, is felt fully, and passes through. Nothing is suppressed. Nothing builds up. The observer simply watches while the experience occurs. Here is how to develop access to the observer. First, practice observing small emotions. Do not begin with your strongest triggers. Do not try to observe rage or terror or grief as your first attempt. Begin with mild irritation, with slight anxiety, with minor sadness. These smaller emotions are easier to observe without being consumed by them. They provide training ground where failure is not devastating. When a small emotion arises, notice it, label it. Say to yourself, there is irritation arising. Not I am irritated. There is irritation arising. The language matters. The language creates the separation. The language positions you as the observer of the experience rather than the experiencer who has merged with the experience. Second, notice the physical sensations that accompany emotion. Emotion lives in the body before it lives in the mind. When anger arises, there are physical sensations: heat, tension, pressure. By observing these sensations, you create distance from the emotion itself. You're noticing what anger does in your body rather than becoming angry. The body becomes an object of observation, and through observing the body, you maintain the observer position. Third, practice during calm periods. Do not wait for emotion to arise to practice observation. Practice observing your experience when emotion is not intense. Observe your thoughts. Observe your physical sensations. Observe your current state without trying to change it. This practice builds the observer muscle, strengthens access to the witnessing position, makes the observer available when you actually need it during emotional intensity. You have a choice. Develop the observer through consistent practice or continue being consumed by every emotion that arises. The development requires effort, requires repetition, requires the willingness to practice something that feels strange at first. But the result is worth the effort. The result is freedom from emotional possession. The result is the capacity to feel without being controlled by feeling. Here is what changes when you can observe emotions without becoming them. First, emotions become shorter. When you merge with an emotion, you feed it. Your identification sustains it. Your becoming it extends its duration. But when you observe an emotion, it arises, peaks, and passes. Without your identification fueling it, the emotion moves through more quickly. What once lasted hours lasts minutes. What once lasted days lasts hours. The observation allows natural completion rather than extended identification. Second, emotions become less controlling. When you are in emotion, it controls everything. Your thoughts, your words, your actions, your perceptions. But when you have an emotion, control remains with you. The emotion is present. The emotion is informing. But the emotion is not dictating. You remain the one who chooses what to think, say, do. The emotion has a voice. The emotion does not have command. Third, emotions become information rather than compulsion. When you merge with anger, you must act on anger. When you observe anger, you can learn from anger. What triggered this? What is anger telling me about my boundaries, my values, my needs? The information is valuable. The compulsion to act immediately is not. Observation extracts the value without the cost. That is the key. Observation transforms emotions from masters into messengers. They arrive with information. They inform you of something important, but they do not take over. They do not control. They deliver their message and they pass. You remain stable throughout. You remain yourself throughout. The emotions move through you rather than becoming you. Consider what this makes possible in daily life. The conflict where you observe your anger arising and choose to respond calmly. The criticism where you notice hurt appearing and choose to evaluate rather than defend. The provocation where you feel the pull to react and choose non-reaction instead. Each of these requires the observer. Each of these requires the capacity to have the emotion without being the emotion. Without this capacity, choice is impossible. With this capacity, choice becomes available in every moment. Here is the practice that integrates everything. When emotion arises, use the gap you developed in Chapter 3. In that gap, access the observer. From the observer position, notice the emotion without becoming it. Label what you observe. Feel the physical sensations. Maintain the dual awareness of feeling fully while remaining the one who feels. This integration makes observation practical. It gives you a protocol for those moments when emotion arises and threatens to consume you. The protocol will fail sometimes. Strong emotions will still consume you sometimes. Old patterns will still activate sometimes. This is not failure. This is practice. Each time you successfully observe rather than become, the capacity strengthens. Each time you notice that you merged with an emotion, you create the awareness that will help you observe next time. The development is gradual. The development is progressive. Perfect observation is not the goal. Improved observation is the goal. And improved observation produces improved freedom. You understand now the difference between having emotions and being emotions. You understand the observer's self and how to access it. You understand what changes when observation replaces identification. But observation is the preparation for something more powerful. The ability to not react at all, to let the stimulus arrive, to let the emotion arise, and to respond with nothing. Chapter 6. The Power of Non-Reaction. You assume reaction is required. Something happens, and you believe you must respond. Someone says something, and you believe you must reply. An emotion arises, and you believe you must act on it. This assumption is so deep, so automatic, so unquestioned that you have never considered the alternative. But there is an alternative, a powerful alternative that most people never discover. Non-reaction, the deliberate choice to let stimulus arrive, to let emotion arise, and to respond with nothing. Not suppression, not avoidance. The conscious decision that no response is the best response. And this capacity for non-reaction is one of the most powerful psychological tools you can possess. Here is what you need to understand. Reaction is not mandatory. It feels mandatory. Your entire system screams that you must respond. But the feeling is a lie. The screaming is conditioning. You can receive a stimulus and produce no response. You can feel an emotion and take no action. You can be provoked and remain still. This is not weakness. This is not passivity. This is the supreme demonstration of self-control. The ability to not react when everything in you wants to react. That is the key. Your non-reaction is your power. When you react, you expend energy. You reveal information. You engage with whatever stimulus arrived. You validate the provocation by responding to it. But when you do not react, you conserve energy. You reveal nothing. You refuse engagement on terms you did not choose. You deny the provocation the response it sought. Non-reaction is not nothing. Non-reaction is a powerful something that most people cannot access because they cannot stop themselves from reacting. Think about what happens when you react to provocation. Someone says something designed to upset you. You react. You become upset. You respond from that upset state. What has happened? You have given them exactly what they wanted. You have confirmed that their words have power over you. You have revealed your triggers. You have entered an engagement on their terms at the time and place of their choosing. Every reaction to provocation is a victory for the one who provoked. Now consider what happens when you do not react. Someone says something designed to upset you. You observe the words. You notice any emotion arising, and you do nothing. You say nothing. You express nothing. You remain exactly as you were before the provocation arrived. What has happened? You have denied them what they wanted. You have demonstrated that their words have no power over you. You have revealed nothing. You have refused engagement entirely. Non-reaction to provocation is a defeat for the one who provoked. Complete and total defeat. You have a choice. Continue reacting and continue giving power to every provocation. Or develop non-reaction and become someone whose stability cannot be disturbed by external attempts. One path keeps you controllable. The other path makes you untouchable. One path expends your energy on every stimulus that arrives. The other path conserves your energy for what actually matters. Here is how non-reaction affects others. When you do not react as expected, others lose their script. They know how people usually respond. They have patterns built on predictable reactions. They say something and expect a certain response. When that response does not come, they are disrupted, confused, uncertain how to proceed. Your non-reaction has changed the entire dynamic of the interaction. Consider the person trying to provoke you. They have a model of how this goes. They poke and you react. They escalate and you escalate. They control the interaction by controlling your reactions. But when you do not react, their model breaks. They poke and nothing happens. They escalate and you remain still. They have no control because you have given them nothing to control. The provocation depends on your reaction to succeed. Your non-reaction makes the provocation fail completely. Consider the negotiation where one party tries to destabilize the other. Aggression is displayed. Threats are made. Pressure is applied. The expectation is that the other party will become emotional, will make mistakes, will concede from fear or frustration. But when the other party does not react, the strategy collapses. The aggression lands on nothing. The threats produce nothing. The pressure creates no visible effect. The non-reacting party has all the power because they have demonstrated immunity to the tactics being used against them. Consider the argument where one person baits the other. They say something hurtful, something designed to wound, something calculated to provoke a response that will escalate the conflict. But the other person does not take the bait. They hear the words. They perhaps feel the sting, and they do not react. The conflict cannot escalate without their participation. The wound cannot deepen without their engagement. Their non-reaction is a boundary the other person cannot cross. That is the key. Non-reaction changes the dynamic entirely. It removes the fuel that most interactions depend on. It denies others the material they need to continue their approach. It places you outside the patterns that govern normal interaction. When you do not react, you are operating by rules others do not understand. And what they do not understand, they cannot manipulate. It is not about never responding to anything. It is about choosing when response serves you and when non-reaction serves you better. Some situations require response. Some provocations warrant engagement. Some stimuli deserve reaction. The skill is discernment. The capacity to evaluate and choose rather than react automatically. Non-reaction is an option most people do not have because they cannot stop themselves from reacting. You are developing that option. You are building that capacity. You are becoming someone who chooses rather than someone who is compelled. Here is the protocol for building non-reaction capacity. First, practice in low-stakes situations. Do not try to master non-reaction when your strongest triggers are activated. Begin with minor provocations, small irritations, slight offenses. These situations provide training ground where the cost of failure is low and the opportunity for learning is high. When a minor provocation occurs, pause. Use the gap you have developed. From that gap, observe the impulse to react. Notice what reaction wants to occur. Feel the pull toward response. And do nothing. Say nothing. Express nothing. Let the moment pass without engaging. This practice builds the muscle. This practice proves that non-reaction is possible. This practice prepares you for higher stakes moments. Second, recognize that non-reaction requires energy. It is not passive. It is not simply failing to act. Non-reaction is an active choice that requires effort, especially when the impulse to react is strong. Do not underestimate what you are attempting. You are overriding conditioning that has been reinforced for your entire life. That override requires effort. That override consumes energy. Plan accordingly. Third, use physical anchors to support non-reaction. When the impulse to react is strong, the body wants to move, wants to speak, wants to express. Physical anchors can interrupt this momentum. A deliberate breath that slows everything down. Hands pressed together that occupy the body. Feet pressed into the floor that ground you in stillness. These physical techniques support the psychological choice of non-reaction. Fourth, focus on the aftermath. Reaction often feels urgent in the moment, but is regretted afterward. Non-reaction often feels difficult in the moment, but is appreciated afterward. When you successfully do not react, notice how you feel later. Notice the absence of regret. Notice the preservation of energy. Notice the power you maintained. These positive outcomes reinforce the choice of non-reaction and make the next instance easier. You have a choice. Implement this protocol and build genuine non-reaction capacity, or continue reacting automatically and remain at the mercy of every stimulus. The protocol requires practice. The capacity requires development. But the result is worth the investment. The result is power. The power to choose when to engage and when to remain unmoved. The power to deny provocation its desired effect. The power to operate outside the reactive patterns that govern most human interaction. Here is what most people never discover. They believe non-reaction is weakness. They believe that not responding means being passive, being pushed around, being unable to defend yourself. But the opposite is true. Non-reaction is strength. It is the strength of someone who does not need to prove anything through reaction. The strength of someone whose stability cannot be disturbed by external provocation. The strength of someone who conserves their energy for battles they choose rather than spending it on every stimulus that arrives. Consider the masters of any domain. The best negotiators do not react to pressure. The best leaders do not react to criticism. The best performers do not react to distraction. Their non-reaction is not weakness. Their non-reaction is the foundation of their mastery. They have learned what you are learning. That reaction often costs more than it gains. That non-reaction is often the most powerful response available. The world will try to make you react. Constantly, daily, through provocations small and large, through stimuli designed to trigger response, through situations engineered to destabilize. This is the nature of living among others. The question is not whether you will be provoked. The question is whether you will react when provoked. And that question determines whether others control you or you control yourself. You understand now the power of non-reaction. You understand how it affects others and changes dynamics. You understand the protocol for building this capacity. But non-reaction is most powerful when combined with another form of detachment. The ability to release attachment to outcomes you cannot control. To invest fully in your actions while surrendering attachment to their results. Chapter 7. Detach from outcomes you cannot control. You are attached to outcomes. Deeply, desperately, destructively attached. You need things to go a certain way. You need people to respond as you want. You need results to match your expectations. And this attachment is creating constant suffering because outcomes are not in your control. Results depend on factors beyond your influence. Other people will do what they do regardless of what you need them to do. Your attachment to things you cannot control is a recipe for perpetual disappointment, a guarantee of ongoing frustration, a commitment to suffering that will never end as long as the attachment continues. Here is what you need to understand. There's a difference between what you control and what you do not control. You control your actions, your effort, your preparation, your response to circumstances. You control how you show up, what you do, how much you invest. But you do not control results. You do not control how others respond. You do not control whether circumstances cooperate. You do not control the countless variables that determine whether your actions produce the outcomes you want. That is the key. Control your input. Release your attachment to output. This principle transforms everything. When you are attached to outcomes, your emotional state depends on things you cannot control. You are happy when outcomes match expectations. You are miserable when they do not. Since outcomes are unpredictable, your emotional state becomes equally unpredictable. You are at the mercy of variables you cannot influence. But when you release attachment to outcomes, your emotional state depends only on what you control. Did you give full effort? Did you act according to your values? Did you do what was yours to do? These questions you can answer. These factors you can control. And when your peace depends only on what you control, peace becomes reliably available. Think about how outcome attachment operates in your life. You prepare for a presentation. You want it to go well. You need the audience to respond positively. You require the outcome to validate your effort. You deliver the presentation, and now you wait. Your emotional state hangs in the balance. If they respond well, you feel good. If they respond poorly, you feel terrible. Your well-being has been outsourced to the audience. Your peace depends on their reaction. You have given them power over your internal state that they never asked for and cannot responsibly manage. Now, consider a different approach. You prepare for the presentation. You invest full effort. You deliver your best work. And then you release. The outcome will be what it will be. The audience will respond how they respond. You did what was yours to do. Everything else is beyond your control. Your peace does not depend on their reaction. Your satisfaction comes from having fully shown up, fully prepared, fully delivered. If they respond well, good. If they respond poorly, also fine. Your emotional state remains stable regardless because it depends only on factors you controlled. You have a choice. Continue attaching to outcomes and continue suffering when outcomes do not match expectations. Or release attachment and discover the stability that comes from depending only on what you control. One path guarantees ongoing volatility. The other path offers reliable peace. One path keeps you dependent on external variables. The other path makes you internally self-sufficient. Here is what you actually control. You control your preparation, how thoroughly you ready yourself, how much effort you invest before the moment arrives. This is entirely yours. No one else determines how prepared you are. No external factor dictates the effort you put into readiness. You control your actions, what you do in any given moment, the choices you make, the behaviors you engage in. These are yours. Others may influence circumstances, but they cannot control what you do within those circumstances. Your actions remain your domain. You control your response. When things happen, when outcomes arrive, when circumstances change, you control how you respond. Not the initial feeling, perhaps, but the response that follows the feeling. The choice of what to do next. This remains yours regardless of what happens. You control your standards, what you consider acceptable from yourself, what you require of your own effort, what you define as having done your part. These standards are yours to set. No one else determines what you expect from yourself. That is the key. These 4 domains belong to you. Preparation, actions, response, standards. Everything else belongs to the world. Everything else depends on factors beyond your control. Recognizing this boundary is essential. Attaching to what falls within the boundary is healthy. Attaching to what falls outside the boundary is suffering. It is not about not caring about outcomes. It is about recognizing that caring does not create control. You can want a positive outcome while accepting that wanting does not make it happen. You can prefer certain results while acknowledging that preference does not guarantee results. The release is not of caring. The release is of the illusion that your attachment influences the outcome. It does not. The outcome will be what variables beyond your control determine. Your attachment only determines your suffering in response. Here is the paradox that outcome detachment reveals. When you detach from outcomes, performance often improves. This seems counterintuitive. You would expect that caring intensely about outcomes would produce better results. But the opposite is often true. Attachment creates anxiety. Anxiety degrades performance. The need for a specific outcome tightens you up, makes you careful when you should be free, makes you hesitant when you should be bold. The attachment that seems like motivation is actually interference. Consider the athlete who needs to win. The need creates pressure. The pressure creates tension. The tension disrupts the fluid performance that winning requires. But the athlete who is fully invested in performing well, while released from needing a specific outcome, operates differently. No pressure, no tension, full expression of capability. The paradox is real. The athlete who needs to win often loses precisely because of the need. The athlete who releases the outcome often wins precisely because of the release. Consider the salesperson who needs to close the deal. The need communicates. Prospects sense desperation. The need makes the salesperson push when they should listen. The need distorts behavior in ways that reduce the probability of success. But the salesperson who is fully invested in serving the prospect while released from needing the outcome operates differently. No desperation to sense. No pushing. Behavior aligned with what actually works. Again, the paradox. Needing the outcome reduces the likelihood of achieving it. Releasing the outcome increases the likelihood. Consider the person in a job interview who needs to get the job. The need creates nervous energy. The need makes them perform rather than connect. The need puts pressure on the interaction that the interviewer feels. But the person who is fully invested in presenting themselves authentically while released from needing this specific job operates differently. No nervous energy, no performance, genuine connection. Once more, the paradox. The person who needs the job often does not get it. The person who releases the need often does. You have a choice. Continue attaching to outcomes and continue degrading your performance through the anxiety attachment creates. Or release attachment and discover that freedom from needing specific outcomes often produces better outcomes than the needing ever did. Here is the protocol for developing outcome detachment. First, identify what you actually control before any performance or important moment. Get clear on your domains. Preparation, actions, response, standards. Write them down if necessary. Be specific about what falls within your control and what is not. Second, invest fully in what you control. Outcome detachment is not passive. It is not reduced effort because results do not matter. It is full investment in your domains while releasing attachment to what falls outside them. You prepare thoroughly. You act with full commitment. You respond with complete presence. The effort is maximum. The attachment to what the effort produces is minimum. Third, practice releasing during the event itself. When you notice attachment arising, when you feel the need for a specific outcome tightening you, release. Remind yourself that you control only your actions. Remind yourself that outcomes depend on factors beyond you. Return your attention to what you are doing rather than what you hope will result. This practice is ongoing. Attachment will reassert itself. Release must be renewed. Fourth, evaluate based on what you controlled afterward. Did you prepare fully? Did you act according to your values? Did you give your best effort? These are the questions. Not did the outcome match what you wanted. The outcome is information. The outcome may inform future preparation. But the outcome is not the measure of success. The measure of success is whether you did what was yours to do. That is the key. Success redefined becomes success available. When success means outcomes, success depends on what you cannot control. When success means full investment in what you control, success depends only on you. This redefinition is not lowering standards. It is correctly locating standards. Standards applied to what you control are useful. Standards applied to what you cannot control are recipes for suffering. Consider what outcome detachment makes possible. Freedom from the anxiety that attachment creates. Performance improvements that release enables. Stability regardless of how circumstances unfold. Peace that does not depend on the world cooperating with your expectations. These are not small benefits. These are transformational changes in how you experience life. You understand now the difference between what you control and what you do not. You understand the paradox of outcome attachment. You understand the protocol for developing release. But there are specific challenges to detachment that require attention. People and situations that drain your energy, that seem designed to pull you out of your stability, that test your detachment constantly. Chapter 8. Protect your energy from emotional vampires. Some people drain you. After every interaction, you feel depleted, exhausted, like something has been extracted from you against your will. These people create drama where none exists. They provoke reactions constantly. They pull you into emotional states that serve them and cost you. And you have been allowing this. You have been giving unlimited access to your emotional reserves. You have been treating your energy as an infinite resource that anyone can draw from without consequence. But your energy is not infinite. Your emotional reserves are not unlimited. And some people are vampires who will drain you completely if you let them. Here is what you need to understand. Not everyone deserves access to your emotional state. This is not cruelty. This is not coldness. This is recognition that your internal resources are finite and valuable. You decide who gets to affect you. You decide who receives your emotional engagement. You decide who has the privilege of access to your energy. These are decisions you should be making consciously. Instead, you've been making them by default, allowing anyone who demands emotional access to receive it, giving unlimited withdrawal rights to people who only ever withdraw. That is the key. Not everyone deserves access to your emotional state. Some people have earned access through mutual respect, through reciprocal care, through patterns of interaction that leave both parties better than before. These people deserve your engagement. These people warrant your energy. But others have not earned access. They take and never give. They drain and never replenish. They destabilize and never support. These people do not deserve unlimited access simply because they demand it. Think about who drains you. You know exactly who they are. The coworker who creates crisis constantly. The family member who provokes conflict reliably. The friend who makes every interaction about their problems, their drama, their needs. The person online who knows exactly what to say to hook your attention and deplete your peace. You know who they are, and you have been giving them full access to your emotional life, allowing them to withdraw whenever they want, letting them drain you whenever they choose. You have a choice. Continue giving unlimited access and continue being depleted by those who will never stop taking, or establish boundaries that protect your energy while still allowing you to function in a world that includes difficult people. One path leads to exhaustion, to depletion, to nothing left for the people and pursuits that actually matter. The other path leads to protected resources, to energy reserved for what deserves it, to the capacity to engage fully with what you choose to engage with. Here is how to identify energy drains. First, notice how you feel after interactions. Not during, when you might be caught up in the dynamic. After, when the interaction is complete and you can assess honestly. Do you feel energized or depleted, expanded or contracted, better or worse than before the interaction started? Your post-interaction state reveals the nature of the relationship. It reveals whether this person gives energy or takes it. Second, notice patterns over time. One draining interaction might be circumstantial. The person was having a bad day. The situation was unusually difficult. But patterns reveal character. If someone consistently leaves you depleted, that is who they are with you. If someone reliably creates drama, that is their mode of operation. If someone always takes and never gives, that is the relationship. Patterns are more honest than individual moments. Third, notice your anticipatory state. How do you feel when you know you will be interacting with this person? Do you look forward to it or dread it? Do you feel energy or resistance? Your anticipation reveals your learned experience with this person. If your body tightens when you see their name, your body knows something your mind might be denying. That is the key. Identification comes through honest assessment of how people affect you, not how they should affect you, not how you want them to affect you, how they actually affect you. Patterns over time. Post-interaction states. Anticipatory responses. These tell the truth about who drains you and who replenishes you. It is not about labeling people as bad. Energy vampires are not necessarily malicious. Many are unaware of their effect. Many are struggling with their own pain and cannot help how they show up. Understanding this does not require you to sacrifice yourself to their struggle. Compassion for their difficulty does not require unlimited access to your reserves. You can recognize that someone is struggling and still protect yourself from being dragged into their struggle. Here is the detachment boundary. You can engage with draining people and situations without being drained. The key is detachment, engagement without absorption, interaction without destabilization, presence without losing yourself. You give what you choose to give. You do not allow unlimited withdrawal from your emotional reserves. Consider what this looks like in practice. The draining coworker approaches. In the past, you would engage fully, absorb their drama, react to their provocations, leave the interaction depleted. But now you engage differently. You are present but detached. You listen without absorbing. You respond without reacting. You participate in the interaction without being pulled into the emotional undertow. The engagement occurs. The drainage does not. This requires every skill you have been developing. The gap between stimulus and response allows you to choose engagement rather than react automatically. The observer's self allows you to witness the interaction without merging with it. The capacity for non-reaction allows you to refuse provocations that would normally hook you. Outcome detachment allows you to release any need for the draining person to behave differently. All of these skills combine to create the detachment boundary. You have a choice. Engage with draining people without protection and continue being depleted, or engage with the detachment boundary firmly in place and discover that difficult people can only drain what you allow them to drain. The boundary requires practice. The skills must be deployed deliberately, but the result is transformation. The result is interactions that no longer cost what they used to cost. Here is the protocol for practical protection. First, limit exposure where possible. Not all draining people could be avoided, but some could be minimized. Reduce frequency of interaction where you have control. Shorten duration when possible. Create distance that does not exist currently. This is not running away. This is strategic resource management. Your energy is finite. Spending less of it on people who only drain means having more of it for people who replenish. Second, prepare before unavoidable interactions. When you must engage with someone who drains you, prepare mentally first. Remind yourself of the detachment skills you have developed. Set an intention to observe without absorbing. Visualize maintaining your stability regardless of what they do. This preparation activates the resources you need. It positions you for protected engagement rather than vulnerable reaction. Third, maintain physical practices that support detachment. During draining interactions, use the physical anchors you have developed. Deliberate breathing that keeps you grounded. Awareness of your body that maintains the observer position. Physical stillness that prevents reactive escalation. These practices are not just psychological. They're physical techniques that support the psychological boundary. Fourth, recover deliberately after necessary exposure. Even with protection, draining interactions can affect you. Do not move immediately into other demands. Take time to recover, to restore, to return a baseline before the next engagement. This recovery is not weakness. This recovery is wisdom. It recognizes that even protected engagement has costs, and those costs must be paid through deliberate restoration. That is the key. Protection is a system, not a single technique. Limiting exposure, preparing beforehand, maintaining practices during, recovering afterward. The system protects your energy while still allowing you to function in a world that includes people who would drain you if you let them. Consider what protected energy makes possible. When you're not depleted by emotional vampires, you have resources for what matters, for the people who deserve your full engagement, for the pursuits that warrant your complete energy, for the life you're trying to build that requires everything you have. Every unit of energy saved from drainage is a unit available for investment in what you choose. Here is what most people never learn. They treat their emotional energy as an unlimited resource that everyone has equal right to access. They give freely to anyone who demands. They allow unlimited withdrawal by anyone who wants. And then they wonder why they are exhausted, why they have nothing left for what matters, why they feel depleted constantly despite not accomplishing anything that should have depleted them. The drain was happening. The vampires were feeding. They just never identified the drain or protected against it. You know better now. You can identify who drains you. You can establish boundaries that protect your reserves. You can engage when necessary without being depleted unnecessarily. You can save your energy for what deserves it. You can stop allowing unlimited access to people who have not earned it and will never stop taking. The vampires will not like this change. They will resist your boundaries. They will attempt to provoke the reactions you no longer give. They will escalate when their usual tactics fail. This resistance is expected. This resistance is evidence that the boundary is working. The vampire pushes back when the food source becomes protected. That pushback is not a sign to remove the protection. That pushback is a sign the protection is necessary. You understand now how to identify emotional vampires. You understand the detachment boundary that allows engagement without drainage. You understand the protocol for practical protection. But there is a higher application of these skills. Moments when stakes are highest, when pressure is greatest, when your capacity for detachment will be tested most severely. Chapter 9. Use detachment in high-stakes situations. Everything you have learned will be tested. Not in comfortable moments when staying calm is easy. Not in low-stakes situations where reaction costs little. You will be tested in the moments that matter most. Negotiations where outcomes affect your livelihood. Conflicts where relationships hang in a balance. Crises where decisions must be made under pressure. High-stakes situations where most people become most reactive. And these are precisely the situations where detachment provides the greatest advantage, where the skills you have been developing separate those who prevail from those who crumble. Here is what you need to understand. High-stakes situations are designed to make you reactive. The pressure, the consequences, the emotional intensity. Everything about these moments pushes you toward reaction, toward emotion clouding judgment, toward impulse overriding strategy, toward the very behaviors that produce the worst outcomes. This is not accident. High-stakes situations activate ancient survival mechanisms that served well in physical emergencies but sabotage in modern challenges. Your biology is working against you in exactly the moments when you most need it to work for you. That is the key. Pressure reveals preparation. Detachment is preparation. When pressure arrives, you do not rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of your training. If you have trained detachment, you will have access to detachment when stakes are high. If you have not trained, you will have access only to your default reactivity. The training you do in low-stakes moments is preparation for high-stakes moments. The skills you build when consequences are small become available when consequences are large, but only if you have built them. Think about what happens when stakes rise. Your body responds to threat. Heart rate increases. Stress hormones release. Blood flow shifts to support fight or flight. These physical changes affect cognition, narrow your perception, reduce your ability to think strategically, push you toward reactive patterns that feel compelling but often produce poor outcomes. This is your biology responding to perceived threat. And in high-stakes situations, threat is perceived constantly. Every moment is emergency. Every decision feels life or death. The biological response runs continuously, degrading your capacity exactly when you need it most. You have a choice. Let biology control you in high-stakes moments and accept the reactive outcomes that follow. Or use trained detachment to override biology and access the clear thinking that high-stakes situations demand. One path is default. It requires no training. It produces whatever your reactive patterns produce, which is rarely optimal. The other path requires preparation. It requires the skills you have been building, but it produces outcomes that reactivity cannot match. Here is how detachment functions under pressure. First, it creates space when everything is pushing toward collapse. High-stakes situations compress. Time seems to accelerate. Pressure seems to eliminate options. Everything narrows to reaction or reaction, but detachment expands. It creates the gap between stimulus and response even when stimuli are arriving rapidly. It preserves the space for choice even when pressure is demanding immediate reaction. This expansion against compression is the fundamental function of detachment under pressure. Consider the negotiator facing aggressive tactics. The other party is loud, threatening, demanding immediate concessions. Everything is designed to compress, to eliminate thinking space, to force reactive capitulation. But the detached negotiator does not compress. They observe the tactics without being affected by them. They maintain the gap even as the other party tries to close it. They respond from strategy rather than react from pressure. The aggression is noted. The aggression is not obeyed. Consider the leader facing crisis. Information is incomplete. Decisions must be made. Consequences are significant. Everyone around them is reactive, emotional, pushing for immediate action. But the detached leader does not join the reactivity. They observe the situation without being consumed by it. They maintain clarity even as others lose theirs. They make decisions from assessment rather than panic. The crisis is addressed. The crisis is not compounded by reactive leadership. Consider the person facing conflict with someone who matters. Words are being said that hurt. Emotions are running high. The relationship feels threatened. Everything pushes toward matching escalation, toward saying things that will make everything worse. But the detached person does not escalate. They feel the hurt without being controlled by it. They recognize the stakes without being paralyzed by them. They respond in ways that address the conflict without destroying what they are trying to protect. That is the key. The calm decision maker is not someone without fear or pressure or emotion. The calm decision maker is someone who has trained themselves to function despite these internal experiences. They feel everything the reactive person feels. They simply have developed the capacity to not be controlled by what they feel. This capacity is not innate. This capacity is built, and you have been building it throughout this audiobook. It is not about eliminating the stress response. It is about not being ruled by the stress response. Your heart rate will increase. Your hormones will release. Your body will respond to threat. But the observer you have developed can notice this happening without being lost in it. The gap you have built can persist even as biology tries to close it. The non-reaction capacity you have trained can function even as impulse screams for immediate action. The skills remain available because you have trained them to remain available. Here is the protocol for high-stakes detachment. First, prepare specifically for high-stakes moments you can anticipate. Not all pressure arrives unexpectedly. Many high-stakes situations can be seen approaching. The negotiation scheduled for next week. The difficult conversation you know must happen. The presentation that will determine significant outcomes. For these anticipated moments, prepare specifically. Visualize maintaining detachment under the pressure that will arrive. Rehearse the skills you will deploy. Anticipate the provocations and plan your non-reactions. Second, use physical anchors immediately when stakes rise. Do not wait until you are fully activated. The moment you recognize that stakes have increased, deploy physical practices. Deliberate breathing that signals safety to your nervous system. Grounding awareness of your body that maintains the observer position. These physical interventions work faster than cognitive interventions. They provide immediate support for detachment while your mind catches up. Third, slow everything down deliberately. High-stakes situations push towards speed, but speed serves reactivity, not strategy. Deliberately slow your speech. Deliberately pause before responding. Deliberately take time that pressure is demanding you surrender. This deliberate slowing creates space. It resists the compression that high stakes impose. It demonstrates to yourself and others that you will not be rushed into reactions you have not chosen. Fourth, maintain awareness that pressure is trying to make you reactive. Name what is happening internally. Notice that your body is activated. Notice that the situation is pushing toward reaction. This meta-awareness, this awareness of what pressure is doing to you, creates distance from the pressure. It positions you as the observer of the high-stakes dynamic rather than just a participant swept along by it. You have a choice. Deploy these protocols when stakes rise and access detachment when you most need it. Or let high-stakes situations activate default reactivity and accept outcomes you did not choose. The protocols require practice before the moment. They require deployment during the moment. But they transform how you function under pressure. Here is what most people never learn. They assume that high-stakes situations require different skills than low-stakes situations. That somehow the pressure of important moments demands something other than what they have practiced. But the opposite is true. High-stakes situations require the same skills as low-stakes situations. The gap, the observer, non-reaction, outcome detachment. These skills do not change because stakes change. They simply become more difficult to access. And difficulty of access is addressed through training, not through hoping that pressure will somehow produce capacity you never developed. Consider what high-stakes detachment makes possible. Negotiations where you are not manipulated by pressure tactics. Conflicts where you do not say things you will regret. Crises where you make decisions from clarity rather than panic. Performances where pressure does not degrade capability. Each of these outcomes depends on detachment functioning when stakes are high, and detachment functions when stakes are high only if it has been trained when stakes are low. The practice you have been doing matters. Every time you use the gap in a minor irritation, you are training for major provocations. Every time you observed a small emotion without becoming it, you are preparing to observe large emotions without being consumed. Every time you chose non-reaction to a slight offense, you were building capacity for non-reaction to significant attacks. The low-stakes practice was never just about low-stakes situations. The low-stakes practice was always preparation for the moments when everything is on the line. Here is what separates those who prevail from those who crumble. It is not intelligence. Intelligent people crumble under pressure constantly. It is not experience. Experienced people still become reactive when stakes rise. It is not natural calm. No one is naturally calm when biology is screaming threat. What separates prevailing from crumbling is training. Preparation. The deliberate development of capacity that does not exist by default. You have been doing this training. You have been building this capacity. When the high-stakes moment arrives, you will have what most people do not have: the ability to remain clear when everything is pushing toward confusion, the ability to choose when everything is demanding reaction. You understand now how detachment functions under pressure. You understand the protocols for high-stakes situations. You understand that low-stakes training is high-stakes preparation. But there is one chapter remaining: the integration of everything you have learned, the final state you're moving toward, the person you are becoming through this work. Chapter 10, Become Untouchable. You have learned 9 principles, 9 chapters of psychological transformation, 9 ways to develop a capacity that most people will never possess. But learning is not becoming. Understanding is not embodiment. You can memorize every principle in this audiobook and remain exactly as reactive, as vulnerable, as controlled by external forces as you were when you started. Because information does not change identity. Only integration changes identity. Only consistent practice transforms who you are. The untouchable person you can become is waiting. The question is whether you will complete the transformation or simply admire the possibility from a distance. Here is what you need to understand. Untouchable does not mean unreachable. It does not mean isolated. It does not mean disconnected from life and people and experience. Untouchable means uncontrollable. It means that no external force can determine your internal state without your permission. It means that provocations arrive and you remain unmoved. That criticism lands and you remain stable. That pressure mounts and you remain clear. Untouchable is not a wall between you and the world. Untouchable is an internal stability that nothing external can disturb. That is the key. Untouchable is not unreachable. Untouchable is uncontrollable. You can engage fully with life while being untouchable. You can connect deeply with others while being untouchable. You can feel everything while being untouchable. What you cannot do is be controlled. What you cannot do is have your state determined by forces outside yourself. What you cannot do is be manipulated through your reactions, destabilized through your triggers, or governed through your emotional vulnerabilities. Untouchable is freedom, complete psychological freedom. Think about what this means in practice. Someone criticizes you harshly. The words arrive. You hear them. You might even feel something in response. But your state does not change. Your stability does not waver. Your peace does not disappear. You receive the criticism from a place of groundedness that the criticism cannot penetrate. You evaluate it. You respond if response is warranted. But you're not touched in the sense of being destabilized. You are not moved from your center. You are not controlled by what was said. Someone tries to provoke you. They know your triggers. They deploy them deliberately. And nothing happens. Not nothing externally. You might respond. You might engage. But nothing happens internally that you did not choose. The provocation lands on armor it cannot penetrate. The triggers that once worked no longer work. The reactive patterns that once governed you have been replaced by chosen responses. You are present in the interaction. You're not governed by it. Circumstances become difficult. Pressure mounts. Challenges arrive. And you remain stable. Not passive. Not resigned. Actively engaged with the difficulty while internally unmoved by it. You address what needs addressing. You handle what needs handling. You respond to what needs response. But your internal state is yours. The difficulty does not determine how you feel. The pressure does not dictate your peace. You operate in challenging circumstances from the same stability you operate in easy circumstances. You have a choice. Become this person or remain who you have been. Complete the transformation or return to reactivity. The untouchable state is available. Every skill you need has been taught. Every capacity you require can be developed. What remains is the decision to actually become what you now know is possible. Here is what the daily practice of detachment looks like. It is not occasional. It is not situational. It is constant, a way of being rather than a technique deployed in emergencies. The untouchable person practices all day, every day, until practice is no longer needed because the state has become permanent. Morning preparation sets the foundation. Before engaging with the world, you establish your state. You remind yourself of who you are choosing to be today. You activate the observer that will witness the day's experiences. You set the intention to respond rather than react, to choose rather than be compelled, to remain stable regardless of what arrives. This preparation takes minutes. These minutes determine hours. Throughout the day, awareness maintains the state. You catch yourself when reactivity begins. You notice when the gap is closing and you deliberately expand it. You observe emotions arising and you choose not to become them. You encounter provocations and you choose non-reaction. You face draining people and you maintain your boundary. Every moment is an opportunity. Every interaction is training. The day becomes a continuous practice of what you are becoming. Evening review consolidates the learning. You examine the day's moments. Where did you maintain detachment successfully? Where did you lose it? What triggered the losses? What can you do differently tomorrow? This review is not self-criticism. This review is intelligence gathering. Understanding today improves tomorrow. Recognizing patterns enables changing patterns. That is the key. The daily practice makes detachment who you are rather than what you sometimes do. Through repetition, the skills become automatic. Through consistency, the state becomes default. Through practice, the untouchable person emerges from the reactive person you used to be. It is not about perfection. You will have reactive moments. You will lose detachment sometimes. You will be touched by things that penetrate your developing armor. These moments are not failure. These moments are information. They reveal where more work is needed. They show where the training must focus. The goal is not immediate perfection. The goal is progressive transformation. Each day, slightly more untouchable than the day before. Each week, more stable than the week before. Each month closer to the state that seemed impossible when you started. Here is what the life that detachment creates looks like. Freedom from manipulation. When others cannot control your reactions, they cannot manipulate you. The tactics that work on everyone else do not work on you. The triggers that govern most people have no power over you. You become immune to the influence games that shape most human interaction, not through ignorance of the games, through immunity to their effects. Peace that does not depend on circumstances. Most people are peaceful when circumstances are favorable and distressed when circumstances are difficult. Their peace is circumstantial, conditional, available only when the world cooperates. But your peace becomes unconditional, present regardless of what is happening around you, available in difficulty as fully as in ease. This is not denial of difficulty. This is stability that difficulty cannot reach. Relationships that are chosen rather than reactive. Most relationships are governed by reactivity, by patterns of trigger and response, by dynamics that neither party controls because both parties are being controlled. But when you are untouchable, your relationships become chosen. You respond to others from clarity rather than reaction. You engage from stability rather than volatility. The relationships transform because one party has stopped being reactive, and non-reactivity is contagious. Others often become less reactive when you stop providing reactive fuel. Decisions made from clarity rather than emotion. Most decisions are emotionally driven even when they appear rational. Fear disguises itself as prudence. Anger disguises itself as justice. Desire disguises itself as logic. But when you can observe emotions without being controlled by them, you can see through the disguises. You can make decisions from actual clarity rather than from emotion pretending to be clarity. The quality of your decisions improves because the quality of your perceiving improves. You have a choice, not a single choice, a continuous choice. In every moment, you choose who you are being, reactive or detached, controlled or free, touched by everything or untouchable. The choice is not made once. The choice is made constantly. And through constant choosing, the choice eventually becomes unnecessary because what was chosen has become who you are. Consider what has been offered in this audiobook. You learn that reactivity is weakness, that every reaction surrenders control. You learn that detachment is not coldness but the presence of choice, that feeling fully and being controlled are different things. You learn that the gap between stimulus and response is where your power lives, that awareness creates that gap. You learn to stop taking things personally, to recognize that most of what happens has nothing to do with you. You learn to observe emotions without becoming them, to have feelings without being had by them. You learn the power of non-reaction, that responding with nothing is sometimes the most powerful response. You learn to detach from outcomes you cannot control, to invest fully in your actions while releasing attachment to results. You learn to protect your energy from those who would drain it, to establish boundaries that preserve your resources for what matters. You learn to use detachment in high-stakes situations, to access your training precisely when pressure is greatest. And now you're learning to integrate everything into a way of being, to become untouchable not as a technique, but as an identity. Here is the truth about this transformation. It is available to you, completely available. Nothing prevents you from becoming untouchable except your own unwillingness to do the work. The skills can be learned. The capacities can be developed. The state can be achieved, but only through practice, only through consistent application of what you now know, only through choosing, moment by moment, to be who you are capable of being. The reactive person you have been is not who you must remain. The vulnerability that has governed your life is not permanent. The control that others have had over your state is not inevitable. All of it can change. All of it will change if you commit to the change and follow through with the practice. Stop being controlled by every stimulus that arrives. Stop being destabilized by every provocation that appears. Stop giving others the remote control to your internal state. Start observing without reacting. Start feeling without being hijacked. Start choosing your responses instead of having reactions imposed on you. Become untouchable, not unreachable, not cold, not disconnected, untouchable, stable in ways that instability cannot disturb, free in ways that manipulation cannot compromise, clear in ways that emotion cannot cloud. This is who you can be. This is who the practice creates. This is who emerges when learning becomes living, when understanding becomes embodiment, when principles become permanent. The untouchable person is not somewhere else. The untouchable person is you. The version of you that exists when reactivity is replaced by choice, when vulnerability is replaced by stability, when control by others is replaced by sovereignty over yourself. Become that person, starting now, and never go back to who you were before you knew what was possible. You have learned 10 truths about emotional detachment. You have learned that reactivity is your main weakness. In addition, you have understood that detachment is not coldness, but the presence of choice. That the space between stimulus and response is where your power lies. You have learned to stop taking things personally, to observe emotions without identifying with them, to use non-reaction as a strategic tool. You have learned to distance yourself from outcomes you cannot control, to protect your energy from those who would drain it, to use detachment when the risks are greatest. And you have learned what it means to become truly untouchable. But here's what matters now. Tomorrow you'll be tested. Someone will say something with the intention of provoking you. Something will happen that would normally elicit a reaction. A situation will arise that will require the skill you have been learning. And at that moment, you will have a choice. React automatically as you always have, or observe without reacting. Feel without being controlled. Respond by choice, not by habit. The person who can do this is untouchable. Not because they feel nothing, because no one can determine what they feel. Not because they are cold, because no one can control their temperature. Not because they're disconnected, because they choose their connections rather than having connections imposed on them through reactivity. Stop being controlled by every stimulus that arrives. Stop being destabilized by every provocation that appears. Stop giving others the remote control to your internal state. Start observing without reacting. Start feeling without being hijacked. Start choosing your responses instead of having reactions chosen for you. Become untouchable,